A very good Breeders' Cup Stats Race Lens users from Louisville. Happy to be with you, Steve Byk and Craig Walker right now. Laffit Pincay III is on his way back from NBC production meetings. He'll be with us in about 10 minutes, and we will dive in to the Breeders' Cup. Right now, dive in, Craig, is the operative word as the rain continues to pelt down. It's supposed to stop within the next hour, and the main track, we're confident, will end up a fast track tomorrow for Breeders' Cup races and certainly for Saturday. But the big question is going to be the turf. And I've talked all week on the radio about what a difficult equation it might be.
Hello, Steve.
Well, there we go. I thought we lost you too.
Yeah.
Was talking, Craig, about the weather, and the main track at Churchill. We'll do some overview things right now before Laffit joins us. And the main track, you don't have to worry about. It drains fast, and it'll be a fast track by the time we get to the juvenile girls and the juvenile boys tomorrow afternoon, and certainly all day Saturday you'll have a fast track. But the turf is a real question, and we're getting the sense, Craig, that even horses that have shown an affinity for yielding and soft, it may not necessarily be an indication of what we're going to get from them over Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, I can understand that. The way I've just been trying to watch. The one good thing about the Breeders' Cup is at breederscup.com they have those morning workout shows, and so I've watched all of those, and I have been just trying to see how some of those horses have gotten, how they've looked when they've gone on the turf course, and so to try to get an idea, even though it wasn't, it was a little bit wet earlier in the week, and then just trying to see who's comfortable on it. So yeah, I am leaning towards maybe horses that like good or soft, in that range is what kind of in my mind is the way I'm handicapping it so far, but that can change at any minute.
One thing, and we're gonna focus our conversation tonight on Saturday. We'll mostly go over the Saturday card, and we might, maybe later before we wrap, we'll get a Friday opinion or two, or maybe a horse that Laffit and you and I are interested in for tomorrow. But one thing that people are I'm sure are going to do, people that are concentrating their bankroll against Saturday, they may take a wait and see approach tomorrow and just see what happens in the juvenile turf sprint, see what part of the turf course looks good. Our horses bogging down. There is the perspective that the inside, even the area that's pristine, there's concerns that that's a boggy part of the turf course, even though nobody's been running over it. So with this kind of weather, I'm sure you might do well to kind of watch on Friday and let that be your guide into Saturday. I understand the people who have already taken that position early.
Yeah, I could see doing that. Yeah, and the one thing is that I would say one good thing that I liked about the way that they're doing the Friday Saturday now is you kind of can handicap the in the same mode. So like, since it's all 2-year-olds on Friday, you know that horses are inexperienced. You know that there can be a big room for improvement. You're watching to see who's comfortable out there in the workouts, which could be more important than it is with well-seasoned horses. In my opinion, just because I watched a couple videos of people walking the pristine part of the course, I mean, it seemed like it was in such good shape. I would find it hard to believe that it would be the worst part of the track, but I mean, I guess it can happen. But The way that they have the
It's not
drainage
going
under there, we'll see. Yeah. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say the worst part, but people that know Churchill, they've been saying all week that the more rain we get, the greater potential there is for the inside to get soft. Basically, the hedge, all the way down against the hedge. But you have to weigh. The jocks will have to weigh the value of being on that good, that clean, pristine part of the turf course versus being out in the middle of the track where there's all kinds of brown patches, where there's a lot of dead. The root system is absolutely dead. And you see clods. You can see in the morning when they're going around the dog, big chunks of dirt are coming up, and the footing is uneven. Brad Cox said to me the other morning, I asked him about Will Call. Will Call had his work on the dirt, and Brad said, I don't want him working out on that turf course. It's a bit of a mess. And, anybody that plays here in the spring versus playing in the fall, there is a huge difference between the two, the way the course is early in the year and now here at the end of the year. And maybe that's part of the reason we've had some crazy prices. Mies's Approval, an upset winner here, going back 7-8 years. Court Vision over Toralura here at Churchill. I mean, there's been upsets on this turf course when they've run the BC here. So just something that, in the back of your mind, you also, one of the things we've got to talk about as we get into the races is a couple of the unusual gate placements. When they run the Filly and Mare Turf on Saturday, you're looking at 1 3/8 and a gate that is virtually on top of the turn. It's a 3-turn race, and horses have literally yards, not barely time to adjust into the turn. So that is an area that the stats are terrible when it comes to horses that are outposted. And one of the best, what looked like one of the best prices of the Breeders' Cup, Azira, I was all excited to bet her. She's going to have to work out a trip under Frankie Dettori if she's going to make an impact in that Filly and Mare Turf. So there's some of those considerations to take in here as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to be like you said. I think you really need to pay attention on Friday, and maybe make some opinions on what's going to happen. I mean, to me, the good thing is at least the main track is going to be fast, and that to me makes it a lot more fair, alleviates a lot of problems. I mean, the turf, you're used to turf sometimes being so many different, the turf at Santa Anita is so different than the turf at Churchill or other tracks. So you're always used to a big difference kind of in that. So
what's happening, guys?
Oh, hey, LP3.
How are we?
Now that you're here, the show can start. You can't start a show without the star.
Yeah. I'm my soft, unexposed to real weather like California blood, freezing out there today. It felt like it dropped at about 15 degrees in about 15 minutes. The pouring rain and the conversation you guys are having, it's almost going to feel like uncharted territory. You're right. The main track will be fast, but I mean, by North American racing standards, like there's soft and then there's this. I feel like there's going to be a lot of guessing and really dart throwing as to, okay, maybe he or she will like this soft turf course, and maybe you just go back to basics and try not to let the conditions, how soft the turf course will be, really get into your head too much.
Sorry, Steve. I just want to say we did have one question that for you two guys to address, and one of the listeners asked if do you think that the Euros who shipped in expected a firm turf, and how do you rate it now that it's going to be soft? Like, what's your general opinion on that?
Laffit, you've talked to Nick Luck about this, and Nick
Yeah.
talked to the Track Super today, and recorded a piece. Why don't you pick that up, and I'll give some thoughts too.
Yeah, Nick is in talking about, I think there's going to be a lot of experimenting and really paying close attention to what happens in any earlier races especially tomorrow, with the juvenile turf, the juvenile fillies turf, how the water rolls on this particular turf course, in trying to find that sweet footing. I know Nick has been referencing that, for Golden Horn, that's what led to his undoing in 2015. John Gosden spent as much time looking up at the sky and checking his Weather Channel app, trying to get a clear indication of what the weather was going to be like, because he knew that Golden Horn wasn't that good or might be vulnerable on a softer turf course. And he was inside, and it was absolutely a bog down in there. So I think you'll see a lot of these riders walking the turf course and maybe changing tactics, even like, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of position if I feel that my horse is going to be that much better on this particular part of the turf course. It becomes, the jockey, in my opinion, becomes that much more important.
And one of the key topics, I brought this up with Nick on Tuesday, it just as suggested by the question, the Euro managers, they come here with a couple of different kinds of horses that do require firm footing. That's the kind of horse that they target U.S. races for, or North American races generally, and also horses that may have a bleeding tendency, and so they can get the advantage of getting medication to help alleviate the tendency to bleed. And the Turks' equation on this is that the ones that come over here and then don't get the turf they're looking for, they're still, if they've got a fancy record, they still get bet, and then they underperform. And it could in fact be you have to do some fine-tooth comb work, but you absolutely could go find places where some of the shortest priced Euro invaders that had expectations came here and fell short. I mean, there's been some crazy horses that never should have lost. I mean, obviously, Rock of Gibraltar was unbelievably unlucky, with an incident that happened in front of him. But Golden Horn, Golden Horn just a couple of years ago, a horse that was counted on. As it happens, the Euros that are here that are going to be well bet, we'll obviously discuss this when we get to Enable.
Yeah,
but as it happens, it seems like they can adjust.
It needs to be clarified that narrative that is circulating out there. I can't tell you how many text messages I've got from, the maybe not a hardcore watching horse racing every day type, but a guy who likes to play the big days. And it's like, wow, they're going to absolutely dominate because of the weather and the turf course condition. That narrative is out there that the softer the turf course, the better the Europeans will be in the Breeders' Cup. And it's just not true. In many cases, quite the opposite. In planning for a turf course, as you mentioned, is going to be that much more firm. I don't think it matters much with Enable. That's one thing that we've learned from her: surface preference or needing a certain type of surface. She can handle just about anything. If Enable loses, in my opinion, it won't be because of the Churchill Downs turf course.
Before we get started, let's also get from you. I was kind of talking general themes. Let's see some of the general themes about Churchill. I brought up. We'll obviously talk when we get to the filly and mare turf about the gate being virtually on top of the turn and how it's going to compromise certainly a horse like Azira. There's also a fascinating scenario where there is no less than 4 short price favorite fillies on Saturday: Marley's Freedom, Enable, Polydream. Up and down these races, there's some horses that if they run their races, Abel Tasman, if they run their races, they're going to win. But it's the Breeders' Cup, and how often do we look at these races and say if horse A runs his or her race, they should win, and then they actually do. you could see all four of those horses winning. You could see all four of them getting upset.
I don't know that there's ever been a more hyped Breeders' Cup horse coming in off of a 7th place finish than Polydream. It was a nightmare trip. I get it. And the trading overseas and how quickly after the foray her price plummeted as clearly an indication of what's expected from her in the Breeders' Cup Mile. I think that the Gold Akova Freddie Head sentiment, those of us that are old enough to remember Miesk at Churchill Downs, that sentiment that's gonna put a real dent in Polydream's price. And I don't know how short of a memory we have as handicappers, considering what happened last year at Churchill Downs. It wasn't just that favorites were getting beat. There were several of them who just weren't competitive at all. 11 of 13 favorites defeated in last year's Breeders' Cup. And if you average it out to average finish for a favorite in the Breeders' Cup, including the two winners, if you round up, about 6th place. I mean, it was Bolt Doro running 3rd, but you also had you had a Arrogate finishing off the board. Some of these big names that just weren't firing. I mean, Aidan O'Brien had the favorite in the Juvenile Phillies Turf. It wasn't Rushing Fall. It was Happily. You had a Drafong. You had a Unique Bella. Overwhelming favorite after overwhelming favorite circling the drain. And when the real running started, both of the ladies, Aurelia and Lady Eli, non-factors. And you wonder if handicappers, how much of that you remember. A horse that you thought was in that lock of the weekend conversation, how trustworthy are the favorites, especially in the grass races, now that you throw in this X factor?
Well, there's always X factors when we get to the Breeders' Cup, including, horses that are lightly raced when it comes to the juveniles, horses that raced in obscure areas. One of the things I've noticed, guys, is that there's more unusual international racetracks on these PPs than I ever remember. That includes, French provincial racetracks, seasonal summer tracks in the UK.
You can't just look at English Champions Day and Arc Day anymore, can you?
No, it's quite something. Before we dive into the races, let me get a couple of notes in. And promotionally, we've got, as always, especially at a time like this, some really fun, some really nice promotions. You can take a 5-day pass for everything on Raceland, and not a bad place. I mean, I suppose for Breeders' Cup, you might ideally have been a subscriber and have had some familiarity. A $75 monthly subscription, $199 for a quarter, or the annual subscription. And True Odds as well has got nice discounted pricing for you. And there's also some interesting new innovation when it comes, as there always is. The developers are constantly tinkering. Craig, talk about the expanded base of information that people can adjust their PPs, and basically when putting together their angles, they're going to have greater depth of past performance and also histories involving sires and dams.
Yeah, so if we just recently last week expanded, so if a user, when they're creating their angles now, if they select an individual sire, dam, jockey, or trainer, or also you can tie it to a track. So if they pick like Churchill Downs, for instance, you can have your angles, the back testing go back for 5 years. I mean, before it was always limited to a single year for all the angles. But if one of the criteria is any of those options, and then with the other criteria added, you can get a lot more data. As we go along, I'll show that feature when we get into these races, when we get into the Breeders' Cup Sprint here to start.
Database. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. And then also, you can still get the details as well for that. So if you have the 5 years, there's a details button, and you can even get, all those horses that are showing those stats that show that back testing, up to 500 we show, if you ever get any of those back tests, and I'll show that as we go along here. We start handicapping.
Excellent. And we should also mention that we'll be together for December 6th for the Los Al 2-year-old card. And in fact, Laffit and I and Craig together again. And I'll be coming to you probably from Pico Rivera, because I'll be out in California right after the symposium at the University of Arizona. I always go to Los Al and broadcast there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, leading up to the Futurity and the Starlet. So looking forward to that.
You come to California the weekend I'm in Vegas. I'll be there for the Jockeys Guild convention. So bad timing, Steve Byk.
So you'll be in Vegas, and I'll be down in the valley there somewhere.
Can't get on the same page.
All right, that's all right. Well, let's dive in and get started. And in fact, even before Craig, even before we talk about the sprint, where we'll start on Saturday's races, we should slip in the Filly and Mare sprint, where last year somehow, some way, you dug up Bar of Gold with a Mies Mesa, and you absolutely a 4-digit exacta that made a lot of people's Breeders' Cup. Can you do it again this year?
Hopefully. So yeah, we can quickly. I can just we'll just go over a couple long shots I like in that race, and then I'm going to put him in with the two favored horses. So the second favorite is Selcourt. This horse has run some strong races. Like you can see, that's won the last 3 in a row. So that's a solid horse. The only kind of question mark is of course that John Sadler still has had. He's been snake bit for all the Breeders' Cups that he's been in, but he has so many good horses this Breeders' Cup. I don't see how he can get shut out again, but there's been great trainers that have had bad luck before, so it's hard to say. And then the other obvious horse is the favorite, Marley's Freedom. I mean, this horse, I think at 7 furlongs, I think it was a question mark maybe going into that last race, but the way she won the Ballerina, I think she's going to be solid too. So the two prize horses that I like a lot. The first one is a horse that when we look at the true odds on the screen, it comes up as a extremely fast race. So it shows as a hot pace race. So there's lots of front runners. I mean, when you look at the run styles and you see all these E's, these are all horses that like to run early. And, this is a typical thing that can happen sometimes in these sprint races where you have tons of speed. But the one that looks fastest of all, the speed of the speed, when you're looking at the numbers and according to Racelens, is number 12, Anonymity. And so in this kind of race, I mean, that's the kind of long shot that I'll take a chance on. I mean, chances are that it's probably going to be too fast a pace, and all those horses out in front are going to die a horrible death. But if it doesn't happen, I've seen it enough times where you think there's going to be a battle, and the horse who gets out there just keeps going. And so let me see if this horse will come up on the screen. Page is still loading. Just 1 minute.
If we have a moment and we're not rushed, Craig,
Sure.
Talk about stats. I have some stats on post positions for the Filly Mare Sprint that are jaw dropping. But continue.
So you can see this anonymity here. When I use the version where the pace figures are here instead of the times. So these are very fast times. The 126 early pace figure and the 117 finishing in 109. This class rating up here is always what the expected winner's probably going to run. So this is within 4 points for an improving horse. I mean, that's always there can be that much improvement. So I'm not too worried about that part. So I mean, I know Sky Diamonds did beat it last time, but this is a horse that's starting off, in maiden and allowance races. I mean, it takes a little bit of time maybe to learn how to control your speed. The first two graded races. So I could see that horse making another improvement. And then the horse that this is going to be, this is like a cross between my exacta last year was Amiz Mesa and Bar of Gold. This is like the combination of those two horses. So this horse is Shamrock Rose. So Errata-Ortiz Jr.'s on it. So he was on Bar of Gold last year. And then there are no horses coming out. We'd always talk to the Presque Isle Down Masters. There are no horses coming out of that race this year. But last year we talked about Amiz Mesa being a synthetic course specialist. And if you look at a Shamrock Rose, you can see that like this horse has done extremely well on the synthetics. The first two starts, the first and the second, and then you see these last three races, the one at Presque Isle Downs and the one at Woodbine were easy wins on the synthetic. And to me, the synthetic always transfers well to a 7 furlong sprint. And that's what the horse did last time. So, I mean, the number is 104, so there's going to have to be, a marked improvement. But with the way that there's so much speed in the race, I think this horse will be mid-pack. And, I'm hoping Errata-Ortiz can give a good ride again. This is the long shot that I like. So I have one from, further back with Shamrock Rose and Anonymity, and hoping that somehow they mix it up with the two favorites in there that I think you can expect one of those two to be in there, and hopefully somehow hit some exactas or trifectas. Go ahead, Laffit.
Yeah, so from a historical race shape standpoint, Anonymity and Shamrock Rose are beautifully drawn. Not the case for Selcourt down along the inside. I'll go through this quickly, but I think post positions 1 and 2 in the filly mare sprint, no filly or mare has hit the board from the rail or the 2-hole, not win, just hit the board in the filly mare sprint since the inaugural running in 2007. Most of them were big long shots with little chance to begin with, but some very good female sprinters have struggled from the inside. And Tangaroo, 6th at 6-1 from the 2. Sarah Louise, 4th and 6th at 4-1 and 9-2 from the 2-hole in back-to-back years. Book Review ran 9th at 6-1 from the 2 post. Sweet Reason ran 8th, 5-1 from the rail. Have You Gone My Way, 7th, 3-1 from the 2 post. Polar Silver Lining, 6th last year. It's been a struggle. Go back and look and see what happened to Turbulent Descent from the 4 post right here at Churchill Downs. The favorite for the filly mare sprint didn't break sharp, buried. Post positions 1 through 3 combined 0 for 33. So there's the data supporting the scenario where you do not want to be inside in the 7 furlong filly mare sprint. So where's the data supporting you want to be towards the outside? Well, you have had 2 winners from post 11, Ventura in 08, Groupie Dawn 13. You have had 2 from post 12, Dubai Majesty at Churchill in 2010, Finest City in 16. And last year, you're talking about Amiz Mesa, who missed by a nose from post 14 at 18-1, as we were just discussing and heralding that selection. So I think from a race shape standpoint, historically, I think it's a trend that continues. Selcourt, a contender, hate the rail, and just for me, I feel that much stronger about Marley's Freedom and the trip she figures to get.
I'll just throw in one comment that Gary Young, Clocker to the Stars, made yesterday, and that is that Anonymity was being looked at for some other lower profile opportunities, and it was Mandela himself that pushed to run her here. And that is unusual. If Mandela wanted to run and chip in here, he's expecting her, and she's giving him signs, because he is not somebody that is just showing up here on a lark.
There's been a lot of that. Jerry Hollendorfer, with both of his 2-year-olds, really campaigning at the time that you didn't know who was going to get in, and as far as the selection committee, really campaigning about gunmetal gray, really campaigning about dueling. So you hear some of that from somebody from a Jerry Hollendorfer, who's a man of few words to begin with, and you start to look at these horses a little bit differently on paper.
It's a fun race, and if it's not Marley's Freedom, there's another 6 or 7 in here that look like they can win, and things will be explosive. Let's keep talking about sprint paces and the one-turn distance. Let's dive in, Laffit. Give us your overview on the sprint.
More stats supporting a certain trend in the Breeders' Cup Sprint that I think will continue this year. California Speed, Southern California-based sprinters, have won 4 of the last 5 Breeders' Cup Sprints at Churchill Downs. There's a reason there's a reference to California Speed. This is what they do in California. And again, 4 out of the last 5. So I'm going with Roy H. And I think he successfully defends his title. His 2 losses this year, you're not going to hold against him. He didn't break in the Golden Shaheen. I thought he looked like a short horse in the Crosby. And in the race he won, the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, prepping just like he did a season ago, just rounding back into form and starting to see that mark of a sprinter really finding his stride, and way towards the outside. Love that post position for Roy H. Like, he gets a great trip, while some of the other ones, including Imperial Hint, are mixing it up. And I don't want to hear the Imperial Hint is going to be ineffective because he's at Churchill. It's just not accurate. One of his races at Churchill was 7/8 or a mile. I can't remember. The other one was on a wet track, assuming this track is finally going to dry out by Saturday. But I think while some of the heavyweights mix it up early on, I think Roy H. sits a beautiful trip on the outside. The only other one I'm looking at, guys, Limousine Liberal. There's a reason he's so good at Churchill Downs. He's a late running sprinter. That climax running style, that long stretch, is going to aid his cause. And if there is a little bit of a meltdown, it's Limousine Liberal who's going to be there to take full advantage. Love the race shape to work in his favor. And, there's something about his personality, I guess, something about his enthusiasm. Limousine Liberals, when Ben Colebrook says, quote, he's even better on big days at Churchill Downs. It's that big day atmosphere that keeps him on his toes. This is an exciting edition of the Breeders' Cup Sprint. There's a championship on the line. I have all the respect in the world for the little rocket ship. Imperial Hint would be a great story, but I'm expecting to see more of what we saw from Del Mar last year with Roy H. and Limousine Liberal in his backyard. He's a serious late threat.
Craig?
And for me, I just think that Imperial Hint is probably going to turn the tables on Roy H. this year. One thing I look at is, on the adjusted true odds, it thinks that Imperial Hint is a slam dunk. It has it as even money, and the next closest horse at 6-1, Roy H.
Wow.
I don't know necessarily if he'll go to the lead or not, but I think he's going to be the controlling speed. If I go look at his races again real quick, his PPs. Let me just let it load 1 second. He's just become he looks like a different horse these last 2 races he ran, just visually, and in the morning he just looked very strong. I was worried about him the one day. He just looked like he ran maybe too fast almost, but I think they caught him quick enough in it, and he's not going to leave his race on the track. But I just like that the last 2 races for Imperial Hint, the way he's kind of bided his time. Even last time, he just was, won as he pleased. I know this is going to be a tougher race, but he's I think going to run well again. And he finished second in the race last year. The other improving horse I like is Promises Fulfilled, and this is sometimes we see in the sprint. Sometimes these 3-year-olds that that tried to get, they were on the Derby trail, and this horse actually ran in the Derby and failed horribly. A lot of times they regroup and say, okay, we tried that, but this horse is a sprinter. I mean, this horse now has won 3 in a row, doing what I think he's meant to do, and so that's why I like that horse. So one thing I'm going to show is what Steve mentioned about the new stats. So when I click here on Del Romans using Saez, the angle will come up here shortly. So now, like I said, when I mentioned it, when Steve asked me that, now instead of just going back 1 year, you can go back 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. And so, 3 is where I set it for. So sometimes even when I'm looking at the different level, like how the win percentages and the ROIs have done over the years, like especially with sires, sometimes I know if a sire started out, I'll ignore the first 2 years, so I'll set it for 3 years instead of back 5 years, and so now you can set any of the angles you can set for any of the time frames for that to be what appears when you click on it. Also, like if you only went for 6 months, when you click the details button, it'll just show the last 15 starts that are tied to this. When I go to 3 years and click on details, it's going to show all 132 starts that you can review. So just that's how that works. And I just want to show that the way that you can when you click on the edit angle button here, this little icon here for the filter settings, that's what you click, and that's where you select the time frame that you want to be on the screen whenever you just like going forward. When I look at it tomorrow, it'll show me 3 years, or if I change to 5 years, it would be that. You just hit the apply button, and then you just hit the save button, and that'll save the time frame that's going to be showed. So it's totally up to the user. So that's great. And then I do am gonna throw a Roy H in as a saver on my tickets. The thing that it just discourages me a little bit about him is that last year going into in the sprint, I mean, he had run some big numbers, the 128, 117, 123, and just won so easy. This year, just his Equibase speed figures, I mean, I know some you can discount because he got off terribly there, but still, he just not as strong as he was, not as sharp to me off the figures, and that's what kind of makes him more vulnerable this year than, he looked like a solid horse last year, and he actually, I needed him to hit that pick 3 that Bar of Gold kicked off. So, last year I was totally with him, but this year I'm just using him as a saver. That's how I see the race.
Depressing me, Craig. You're depressing me.
Well, I think the issue that Imperial Hit is going to face here is having Promises Fulfilled inside of him, and Promises Fulfilled has that elongated sprinter speed that could really compromise Imperial Hit. And there's a few spots on Imperial Hit's record where when he's extended in that fashion, it has compromised him. And I got a feeling the pressure is going to mount inside and out. I mean, I happen to love him too, but last year I picked him and I thought that he was going to be tough to beat, and when he got corralled, I'm a little disappointed. I'm not sure if he's better this year, and I don't necessarily think that this group of horses is any easier for him. And the presence of a horse like Promises Fulfilled, it really has the potential to compromise him. So the Limousine Liberal appeal is strong, given his 6-for-8 record at Churchill. I don't understand why these sprints have not been filling, to be honest. This is another year where we don't have a full field in the most basic race that's run more often than any other in North America. It is a little odd, but
there are too many options. There's just too many options, Steve.
Yeah. The Dirt Mile and the Filly and Mare Sprint. Agreed. Well, let's go to the Turf Mile. Let's go to the 8th, and the Poly Dream conversation has come up. We've got 8 Euros versus 6 North American players. We've got a horse that resurrected himself. In Oscar Performance, I will tell you right now, and this is not a publicly disseminated piece of news, there's real potential if this rain, if it stays on much longer, there's a real chance Oscar Performance comes out of this race. I'll tell you now. And that decision, I think, will be made, probably as early as tomorrow by post time. We'll see. But I think there's real concern in that camp that this course is going to be too sodden for Oscar Performance. So if that happens, make yourself mentally prepared for that. Craig? Or Laffit, actually.
Just if in fact he comes out, you have to almost go back to square one, don't you? From a race shape standpoint, and the impact that would have on how this mile is run if Oscar Performance isn't in the mix.
Yes, analyze it. Obviously, becomes potentially a pace setter right away. You would think that is something that Chad Brown would want to do with Arad Ortiz. I think we've got. I think you're right. I think we've got a real issue. Particularly because the Euros, who exactly, I suppose, happily might be interested in the front end at that point.
That's certainly that's a development to follow, and again, not only pouring as of 35 minutes ago, but the temperature dropping and the impact that'll have on the turf course. Excuse me. Look, it's going to be soft. It's just a question of how soft it is. For the mile, I am leaning in the direction of the Europeans. I think that's been a common theme this year regarding the older males in the middle distances from a mile to a mile and a half. Not the strongest contingent of North American-based runners for the mile or the Breeders' Cup Turf. I'm going with Gustav Klimt, and I guess what we're starting to do now is immediately, okay, well, what have they done on a softer turf course? Gustav Klimt is proven on it. A solid run in a Group 1 on heavy ground at Haydock. A win much earlier in his career on heavy ground at Leopardstown. A stat that jumped out at me was that Aidan O'Brien is 0 for the Juvenile Fillies Turf, 0 for the Filly Mare Turf, 0 for the Breeders' Cup Mile. In fact, just something to keep in the back of your mind, O'Brien, and I don't know that there's any reason or science or explanation to it, but O'Brien has won a grand total of 1 Breeders' Cup race with a female racehorse. 1. That was found beating Golden Horn. Every other victory in the Breeders' Cup competition has been with a male racehorse. Gustav Klimt, though, I'm not going to worry about the post. I know it's not ideal, but if 6 Perfections could win from the parking lot, go back to Lure winning from far outside. If he's regarded as one of the best jockeys in the world, Ryan Moore, I think if you like the horse, you can bank on him working out a trip. And we've seen this act from Ryan Moore before. It was 2015, the Juvenile Turf, hit it a bomb, grabbed him, got over, saved ground, and outdueled Aero Force to the wire. So I'm not going to let the post throw me. In fact, if you like Gustav Klimt, you're just going to get a better price because of the post position. I think O'Brien gets his first win in the mile. Really like Gustav Klimt quite a bit and interested to see what happens with the price. We touched on Polly Dream earlier. I'm going to use her underneath. And again, it's just so much hype for a horse coming in off of a 7th place finish. A lot of traffic. Everybody's seen it. I mean, everybody knows that there's nothing sneaky about Polly Dream at this point. Hot with the European bookmakers, and the idea that the names Miesk, that happened at Churchill, her second. She was the first back-to-back Breeders' Cup champion ever. Goldakova. So with Freddie Head, I think the wagering public is going to trust. So even if you think Polly Dream is the best horse in the race, the price isn't going to be square, in my opinion. They're both exiting the foray, and traditionally a productive race for the Breeders' Cup Mile. But I'm going with Gustav Klimt in that outside box, not worried about it, to beat Polly Dream. Not enthralled with the Americans.
Correct.
So I'm going a little bit of a different way here. One thing is I did want to show the True Odds screen, and so we can see here that on the race lens it does agree with Laffit. It has Gustav Klimt as the top choice, Polly Dream as the third choice. So it has them in there as the contenders. The horse that I'm interested in is number 2, Next Shares. And let me see, I was just going to take out a couple of, because just take out Hunt and Clemmy for now. And so when I'm looking at this horse, he kind of was stalking a fast pace last time, and I kind of think that the way that things are shaping up here with the speed, that he's going to be kind of setting in 4th or 5th. Like I think he's going to get kind of an ideal trip, and I like that about him. One thing here is I do want to show that Oscar Performance is on the race projection here is labeled not on the lead, and just let me show why really, or why I believe it is. I mean, it's Stats had their team came up with all the intricate math and everything that does all that. But I'll bring up the last race right here from Oscar Performance. Just loading 1 second, and I'll show you why it has them back. And this is one of the things why that this is a tool, and it's great most of the time. Sometimes you can figure out why some things go one way or the other. Other times it totally influences me 100%, and I go with what kind of is getting recommended. But a lot of times it's just a tool that you build off the things that you want to look at. So when we bring up Oscar Performance, we can see that last race had a 101 Equibase speed figure, which is very low. I mean, the winner is supposed to run 122 today. And then the reason you can see why is the pace was so slow here. You had 49 and a 74. I mean, these numbers should be up in the 121s, like these races here. So that just was, I know that sometimes with the buyer figures, they'll actually increase the speed rating, just not make up a number, but put a more representative number in there, because they think if the pace is too slow that the resulting speed rating, should be changed. I mean, we always leave it the same because we just say, ignore the line is probably the best thing to do. But I think in race lens, because this pace was so slow, that's why it doesn't have Oscar Performance on the lead, because it probably weights that last race fairly heavily. And so I just wanted to point that out to people. That's why somehow those things don't work. I did want to say that one thing with Oscar Performance, we can see that back when the track was good at Churchill Downs, as the favorite, ran very poorly. It gets back to what Steve was saying is why they may scratch. And also, when I look at Kitten's Joy at Churchill Downs, it's not the greatest record either. It's comes up as a negative angle because of the poor ROI, and the horse is not doing that well. I mean, I can click on it to show you the win percentages, but I mean that kind of, to me, whether they scratch or not, just the condition of the track, makes this horse a toss out for me. And so I guess, you can decide what, this just shows it's 12% across the board. So just the prices aren't that great when that horse comes in. Horses, the offspring of Kitten's Joy, that's at Churchill Downs. So the next share is, I think he's going to get that ideal trip, and then what I liked about him is this was in that last webinar we did. I kind of overlooked this horse. I had forgotten how good the horse looked at Kentucky Downs, but I think that was a restricted race, and I just kind of, he won it so easily, looked so good. I just kind of didn't give him enough credit, and I think it's one of these horses that was, running pretty well, some nice numbers at Southern California, and just kind of quit learning how to win. And then all of a sudden that race in Kentucky just turned him around. And then I think he's liking the weather there. They've kept him in Kentucky the whole time, and he just won that Shadwell Mile so easily. This is going to be one of my biggest bets of the whole Breeders' Cup for sure. And it was a good track last time, so I think he's going to be okay with the soft. I just kind of think, and then you have Tyler Gaffleon, who's been on fire for this last month, did great at Keeneland. So I'm really high on this on next shares. The other horse I'm going to throw in is I Can Fly, and the one trend that I'm going to have to buck with this horse is that it is like Laffit just talked about. It's a filly, and a 3-year-old filly, and Aidan O'Brien hasn't had that much success. I have the angle here that shows you what he's done with horses that are 2 or 3 years old, and so we can just look at that real quick. But you can see that that's not that great. But I do like that the horse does seem to like the soft track conditions. And the horse won at a mile this year, so you can see the win percentage is not that great out of 27 starts. And then I also like that that last race she finished a heck behind Roaring Lion, and if Roaring Lion was in any of the turf races here, he'd be the favorite or second favorite for sure. So that's a positive sign. So she looked really good there. And and she did win at a mile earlier in the year. This race, I do like horses that win at a mile. Polydream we already talked about. That horse hasn't won at a mile this year, but Laffit covered all the reasons why that horse is good. And then just the other horse I'm going to throw in as a long shot is this Lightning Spear. I like this jockey. I like the horses he's going to get on this Breeders' Cup, so I'm just kind of key on him in some of the races. And this trainer's done well here with his shippers before too, and this horse beat Expert Eye. So I just think it could run a big race at a big price, and so he's going to be my throw-in horse. Do you have anything to add, Steve?
I've been kind of all over the board in here. This is traditionally one of my favorite races, and I'm not happy with with the scenario that we're kind of facing in here. I had been quite ready to be dismissive of Polydream, and then watching her all week, since she came out of quarantine, she makes a positive impression. And who's going to argue with Freddie Head and and Maxime Guillon and everything going on in here. Next Shares is a horse that I think has opened a lot of people's eyes. I think everybody, and Laffit, you could appreciate this.
Yeah.
Richie Baltas, I think people thought that, that the California turf contingent was just, no matter what, was going to be a cut below. And so there may have been some preconceived notions, and I would not let that, creep into your thinking. He's the real thing. And he is born again in this part of the country, without question. So Next Shares also drew beautifully. There's a lot to like about how he comes into this. You mentioned I Can Fly, Craig, and Lightning Spear. I Can Fly. Nick Luck put in a strong word for I Can Fly in here today when I talked to him. Lightning Spear, I had conversations with David Simcock after he went up to Woodbine and won the Woodbine Mile, not with Lightning Spear, but we talked about Lightning Spear, who was getting ready for this. They had focused on this spot from earlier this summer, and that typically, we could also say that about Azira, who's going into the filly and mare turf. She drew horribly, but she was a horse that absolutely was targeted from early on this season by Dermot Well to come here. And trainers like these, when they make the Breeders' Cup a goal, they've got some very strong records of success. So I find this one of the more entertaining races of the day, and I think I've got to reserve judgment until we know where we stand with Oscar Performance. But Next Shares is going to be on tickets. I actually there were a lot of people, Shadwell and their organization, that were anxious to get in with Mustachery. Ends up out in the 14 hole, but Mustachery, there's a bit of a buzz around. So there's a lot going on in this mile, and I think we all need to take a wait and see somewhat with Oscar Performance. Let's move to the late pick 3 and the Distaff. And again, here's the next filly or mare that you have to ask a hard question about. Abel Tasman might have had a little bit of the bug that was going around the Baffert barn when she laid the giant egg in the Zenyatta. But Laffit, there's also another school of thought that says she and Late absolutely knocked each other for a loop at Saratoga, and Late did not come out of it. And is it possible that Abel Tasman was feeling the effects of that Phipps performance or personal ensign performance, and that she might not be the same horse that she was earlier this year?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree that there's a strong possibility, not a coincidence that we hadn't seen a Late since, and that Abel Tasman came back. Bob Baffert said she never actually got sick. She was fighting off whatever bug was going around. But that personal ensign was the epitome of a slugfest, a fist fight. For the record, I agreed with the no call, thought it was 50-50. But at that level, running that hard, looking at each other in the eyeball, what felt like a 15-round heavyweight bout, and all the physical contact, who knows? It's not as if Baffert led Abel Tasman over for the Zenyatta. It's not as if there was a signal there given that she wasn't going to perform. Mike Smith said she was a little bit lackluster in the warm-up leading up to the race, but we don't know, because she didn't get sick or she's trained well since. Whatever was bugging her that day, we don't know what kind of impact that's going to have for this Distaff. Otherwise, she wouldn't have run. She wouldn't have run in the Zenyatta if Baffert suspected anything was wrong. I think she's going to get bet down from that 7-2. There's the simple name familiarity. We're talking about Mike Smith. We're talking about Bob Baffert. Just want to know the Triple Crown. My approach to this race is that I'm looking for fillies or mares moving in the right direction. To me, Abel Tasman moving in the wrong direction. If she wins, fine. Wouldn't be surprised. The runner-up last year, if she brings her A game, she wins. We know that. I'm hesitant to accept expect all of a sudden she's going to snap back and flash that Abel Tasman form. We've grown accustomed to seeing it. I'm not buying it. I thought the 3-year-old fillies with Monomoy Girl, with Midnight Bijou. I think some of it was that deep, tiring track at Parks, but we're talking about some long, potentially taxing campaigns. And I'm wondering if, specifically for Monomoy Girl, we've already seen the best she has to offer this year. Now, she is training well and back at Churchill Downs. I get it. The wandering that cost her the cotillion, I suspect it might be the first indication that she may be regressing just a little bit. Not that she doesn't come out and run well. I don't think we see her A game. So if you take that stand, that's the stand I'm taking. And okay, I'm moving beyond Abel Tasman. I'm moving beyond Monomoy Girl. This becomes a really interesting race. I'm leaning in the direction of Wildcat for Chad Brown. And again, here's a horse she's moving in the right direction as Wildcat, coming off that win in the Beldame. I recognize she defeated a former chief claimer to win the Beldame, but the division just isn't as strong as we thought it would be because of some of the defections, some of the casualties along the way. The history of the Breeders' Cup Distaff, and maybe I lean on this a little bit too much, but it's certainly a factor, littered with South American bred fillies and mares who've thrived in this race, going back to Bayacoa twice in 89 and 90. Passiana won in 92, the Argentine mare, and defeated a nose by Hollywood Wildcat in 1993. I think Wildcat is on the improve. I like what I've seen from her on the track. I like what I've heard from Chad Brown. I think she's moving in the right direction. Typically, I don't know that she's Breeders' Cup Distaff material. I give her a big look in this Distaff. And underneath, it's Blue Prize for me. And we were at the Spinster and watching her sidewind her way to a victory there. And I guess the way I'm looking at the Spinster is that there's two perspectives. Do you give her extra credit for running sideways and still winning? How much does she win by if she runs straight? Or is it simply an indictment of her competition? Look at this. She was a mess in the stretch and still able to win. Blue Prize, much like Limousine Liberal, is a different filly over at Churchill Downs. The numbers speak for themselves. So I'm leaning in the favor of the South Americans, Wildcat and Blue Prize. And again, it's the key of the horses moving in the right direction as opposed to those who either are going backwards or maybe they're just not necessarily peaking.
Greg?
Yeah, so for me, I'm still gonna stick with Monomoy Girl. I just have tried to beat this horse too many times and been unsuccessful. So I finally learned my lesson. So I'm still gonna play that horse. I've liked the way that it's looked. From what I've watched on the morning workouts, that the horse looks so solid. And then I agree with Laffit. I'm gonna go with Wildcat. So this was a horse that he and I both tried to beat in the last webinar. I think I forget who had Divine Miss Gray and the other one had Verve's Tail, but we ran second and third behind it. And the thing was,
you can't beat the
and the thing was this horse had when you look back at the Chile races, one thing I like about that we have here are these speed ratings for these foreign races. I think it helps a lot. And the horse had won a 118 and a 13, but then I think I talked about in the last webinar, like where was that the first two races? Like it was kind of disappointing. But now that race, the horse looked so good winning that race, and it ran the 115, which when you look at today's class rating, we're expecting the winner to run a 114. So I mean, if it's back to this level like it was, then it could even have another improvement. So I think for sure that's the now horse to bet, just like Laffit talked about. Steve?
there's a number of referendums going on in this race. Obviously, one of them is the 3-year-olds. When we get to the Classic here in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about a class of 3-year-olds absent of Justify that looks a little suspect. And you're going to have to make some decisions about McKinsey and so forth, and Mendelssohn and Catholic Boy and Axelrod. Here we've got the top 3 finishers from this year's Kentucky Oaks. So there's a major storyline that's staring us in the face. Then we've got 2 fillies in here in Champagne Problems and Blue Prize that are absolute distinguished Churchill lovers. Something that has been proven, time and again when we come to this venue. Horses that like this track like it a lot. So you got a lot going on in here. And then at the top of all of this is Abel Tasman and having to make a decision about whether she comes back and runs one of those races that would have her top this field by 5 lengths. I mean, one of the things about this is if she runs her race, she'll win by half a dozen. So this is really to me, one of the best distaffs, even though people may feel like the division is just okay from a betting standpoint. And that's one of the odd themes about this whole Breeders' Cup. And Laffit, you guys are doing production meetings and you've got things to talk about tomorrow and Saturday. One of the things that has become apparent to me is that without big stars and notably Justify, this is just a bettor's Breeders' Cup. There's no overarching nonsense. There's no phony Grand Slam try. None of the ridiculous hype. There's just 14 really good betting races, and that's it.
We shot the betting show earlier this evening with Brittany and Nick and Edzo, who's in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge as a result of his win in the Pegasus World Cup Betting Challenge, Matt Bernier. And that was the theme of the betting show. Yeah, I mean, this is a championship-defining event. And if you ask any horse player, they'll tell you it's Christmas for the horse player and 2 days of it. And I think that's what it boils down to is, the 2 best days of handicapping, of playing the ponies on the year. And you're right about the distaff. That is the story. Last year's Oaks winner against this year's Oaks winner. And by the way, the top 3 fillies from this year's Kentucky Oaks beneath the Twin Spires once again. It's a great story.
Well, and one horse that I've been following all since the summer is La Force. And Patty Gallagher, I wrote to Patty about 3 weeks ago. I said, are you okay to come to distaff? And he said, absolutely. La Force is going to be a gigantic price, and she's one of those Kenny Kirkner reverse tri-key horses, a horse that you build a small ticket on, you place her third, and then you go 5x4 on top of her with all the obvious horses. And then when she finishes third at 27-1, you cash yourself a nice try ticket. That's a reverse tri-key.
Maybe more so, Steve, than a trend. It's just a fact, and maybe, I don't know, you feel a little bit better about backing a filly like La Force, is the fact that the 2 biggest upsets in Breeders' Cup distaff history have both taken place at Churchill Downs. I realize you treat every year as an isolated event, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. One Dreamer in '94, I believe she was 47-1 in the biggest upset of all, Spain, for the Thoroughbred Corp at, I don't know, 50-1 or whatever it was in the 2000 distaff. 47.
47-1, and one of the great doubles in history when Caressing followed up also at a gigantic number. And but one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Breeders' Cup. The 2000 here was really special. And then
you sound familiar enough with it that you had it or something, which I'm not going to buy for a second.
We had a lot of it, actually. My buddy Barbecue Bill, I was doing the barbecue here, and Bill had Spain. He was on Spain. I found Caressing, and we were standing in line by the paddock, the old paddock pavilion they knocked down. And I said, Bill, look at this. Thunder Gulch filly, 40, 50 to 1. He said, all right, that's us. And we bet her. And Bill was good friends with Bill Perry, the trainer from Boston, who had Northeast Bound, who Warchant caught in the last stride, Neil Drysdale. So we had that exacta. I was all over Honest Lady and keyed her in the sprint.
Just missed Kona Gold. Did you? Yeah.
It's my favorite. It's my best Breeders' Cup and my favorite Breeders' Cup. That was one of the great couple of hours in racing history.
Maybe we can party like in 2000 again.
That's back when I drank too, so you can imagine. We headed over to Taylor Boulevard and took advantage of the Ville back then. I can't do that anymore. Let's talk. We got about 15, 18 minutes left to the bottom of the hour. Let's get to Enable and figure out, is she a winner or do we have another ARC victress that fails to win in the turf?
Craig, you want to go ahead? Is it? Yeah. Yeah, look, if you're designing a cover for this, like the program for this year's Breeders' Cup, Enable is a superstar that deserves to be on the cover. I have bought in hook, line, and sinker. If she loses, I lose. I will say, and we all defer to Nick when it comes to the insights regarding the Europeans, and obviously with him, it's not just what you see in a racing form, and it's not just regurgitating what's in a form from overseas. As far as some more background and intent and who these horses really are, there's no better source. And I on the betting show, I said to him today, I feel like I sense that he's a little bit more suspect about Enable as we get closer to the event. Some of it commentary from her trainer, John Gosden, but he's not, I don't sense a tremendous amount of confidence, which is making me very uneasy because I thought she was an absolute cinch, to be quite frankly. There isn't much about Enable that hasn't already been said. I get it. No ARC winner has won the turf, but I believe the ARC has produced 11 Breeders' Cup turf winners. Maybe it's a dancing brave thing. If he can lose, anybody can. But the fact is, it's been a very productive race. You can't call it a prep race, but a productive race. Horses exiting the ARC and running in the Breeders' Cup turf. The European domination in the turf is out of control. Since 2000, European-based runners have won 14 of the last 18 Breeders' Cup turfs. Tory, 4-time Breeders' Cup turf winning jockey. I was buying into the theory, and I'm trying not to allow myself to be talked out of it, that what the version we saw of Enable in the ARC with just the one prep, the time off prior with the injury, the sickness in between the Kempton race and the ARC, was that, well, then she's going to be that much better in the Breeders' Cup turf. But then on the show today, Nick brought up that, well, John Gosden said on camera that it took her a little bit longer to get over the ARC, almost like not a built-in excuse, but kind of a built-in excuse. So I'll say this. Coming in when I arrived in Louisville, I thought she was, if you want to build a ticket around in your free bingo space, it's Enable. I feel a little less confident because of what I'm hearing from those a little bit closer to her than certainly I am.
That came up. It's funny you say that. That kind of I kind of heard that sneak out a little bit with Nick today too, with Nick Luck, and that kind of took me by surprise.
Yeah. He'll tell you this is the most talented horse, and as long as racing luck doesn't play a major role, that this horse is going to win. More often than not, he's right when he's that confident. I sense, again, talked about it on the betting show tonight. I told him, I said, you sound suspect. You sound like you're a little suspect of her chances.
Greg Walker.
Yeah, the only reason, I mean, that you try to take a shot against a horse like this is like you said, the ARC winners have never been able to come back and win this race again. I know it's a small sample size, like 0 for 8 or something like that. The other kind of negative is, as great as John Gosden is, I think he's 0 for 7 with horses he's put in the in this race. He's won other Breeders' Cup races, but not not this one. So that's kind of when I'll try to find something else. But I mean, the way this horse has looked since she's been here, I mean, in the morning, I mean, she just
Yeah.
looks classy. I mean, she wants everyone to get out of her way and look at her, and I mean, you can tell she's unbelievable horse. So, going to be tough to beat. But there are two. I kind of narrowed down the American contingent to two horses, and so I think that makes it easy for me to play some other horses in this race, even though I'm going to use an Able. And the first horse I'm going to use is Robert Bruce. And these 125, 123, 124 Equibase speed figures. I mean, those are the top type of numbers that a turf horse in America is going to get. I know that this horse will like the soft turf. I mean, you can see 4 out of 5 in a second, so that's good to know. I mean, you see the horse runs. I mean, every time you see all these wins, had trouble and still only lost by a length that time, and then ran second to a Channel Maker last time. So just there's a lots to like. I think he can turn the tables on Channel Maker. But that being said, Channel Maker's big odds too, and so he's the other horse that I'm gonna play. So I think I'll probably I'll use all three of the horses pretty evenly. I mean, I might try to use Robert Bruce a little bit more just because he's won so many times. A lot more consistent on the win end than a Channel Maker. So I'll probably use him a little bit more. But like you said, Enable is going to be tough. I mean, you can see these ratings of 132, 135, 128, 126. I mean, those are all giant numbers that very few horses run on a consistent basis. So that horse is going to be tough to beat. But that's how I'm going to attack the race.
And you don't have to worry about surface preference for her, proving on all types of surfaces, which is going to be that's going to be the asterisk. It's just about, the Americans, the Europeans, whatever, in terms of which one of them are going to handle this yielding turf course.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, Enable kind of got me more and more interested and excited the more I watched. The horse that came up in conversation that I think people need to have maybe as a backup, and in fact, Craig, you can again show people the new handy stallion statistics, because Magical is going to be a pretty square price. You're going to get Ryan Moore, and happens that the filly is a Galileo, but she's coming off of a terrific performance in that champion stake against Coronet and the Andrew Lloyd Webber filly Latzidar. I would give Magical, sort of got kind of a little bit of a wave here last couple of days. So I just wanted to toss her name out there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show one thing. So this was one thing. I mean, this is one that I'm using as a negative angle, and that's the Galileo. The horses just haven't done. Let's get some detail on it real quick, just briefly. Just in the when we look at the angle for the last 5 years, the Galileo offspring just haven't done that well. I mean, it's not a huge amount of races, but it is 18 races. And when you look at the details, there's only one winner, and that's this Global View, and that was in 2014. Even the last couple of years, like, there haven't been many Galileos that even have come over and run at Churchill. You had 0 for 5 2 years ago, and in the past 365 days, only one Galileo's even run on the course. So that's for me. That's been kind of, I'm discounting horses that are offspring of Galileo at Churchill Downs for this Breeders' Cup. So that just on the turf. So just that's the way it worked out. What worked out for me looking at the stats.
Well, and again, this is how you use the tools inside of Raceland. One horse that I came here and I was all excited to bet, and the turf condition situation is going to make it a little bit trickier, was Sadler's Joy, who has had a lot of bad luck this year and has kind of had circumstances work against him on a regular basis. And this is a turf course that actually was going to benefit him in terms of configuration. In fact, Tom Albertrani and I had an off-air discussion about this. He had never run at Churchill, and it was something that Albertrani, kept angling toward this with some excitement, because he figured to benefit if there was going to be any kind of pace. Sadler's Joy figured to benefit from the way this course is configured, and unfortunately, the soft turf may mute that. But Sadler's Joy will be running, and he'll get to spin off that turn, and he'll be in full flight. So you don't forget, when you have a long stretch like you've got it at Churchill, 1,234 feet on the dirt track, that also provides for a long turf stretch. Not as long as New Orleans, but it benefits horses from off the pace. So I had hoped to bet Sadler's Joy, and I know I'll have him as a C or a couple of savers on him. I'm a big fan. Let's get to the classic, Laffit. Start us off on this intriguing group of horses. They're coming from a lot of different directions, and there's almost too many ways to go.
There's so much meat on this bone. In the last few years, you've had the superstar standouts. You had an American Pharaoh. You had an Arrogate, a Gun Runner v. Arrogate last year. And I guess this is sort of emblematic of how the whole year has gone, with seeing a Triple Crown winner who was only in training from the start of his career to the day he retired for so many days. And back then hoping we'd see Justify in the Breeders' Cup Classic. But what we wound up with, and it goes back to a point you made a few minutes ago, Steve, of the identity of this Breeders' Cup. This is the Handicappers Breeders' Cup. And you have a Breeders' Cup Classic that I don't know that there's three horses that you can just toss when you get this group together. I think there's a couple of trends that you have to keep in mind, which, by the way, leads, let's just put it out there, I'm going with Yoshida. I'm going with Yoshida. Maybe this is a little bit too close to the heart in terms of the last Breeders' Cup Classic that was at Churchill Downs. One of my obsession horses, Drosselmeyer, who won the Classic for Windstar and Bill Mott in 2011. But that's the thing. When we've been trained to believe that when we're at Churchill and we're handicapping the Derby, we want horses close to the lead when the real running starts. Horses turn for home. If you're not in contention, you're in real trouble. That's the theory in handicapping the Derby. The Breeders' Cup Classic at Churchill Downs is polar opposite. Aside from Black Tie Affair in 90 and Tisnow a decade later, it's been dominated by mid-pack horses to closers. And this is what part of the reason I like Yoshida. The Classic is just run differently at Churchill than the Derby is. And his Woodward, it looked like a full dress rehearsal on all hands on deck for the Breeders' Cup Classic. 14 horses. I expect the pace to melt down in this Breeders' Cup Classic. And watching Yoshida, while it wasn't necessarily fast, it was one of those races, but I'm believing what my eyes are telling me. And he looked good, showing he could win at the grade 1 level on dirt. Churchill Downs, not to get into a huge scientific semantic explanation, it's long been believed that if a turf horse is going to handle a dirt surface, it's at Churchill Downs, and Yoshida does have that Drosselmeyer feel to it. Maybe I'm being a little too sentimental here, but in a race that I think is going to have a hot pace, where I think some horses are going to start to come back, look for Yoshida to be making a big move late. Having said that, I'm not going to get beat by not including Bob Baffert. Baffert, who's won 3 out of the last 4 Breeders' Cup Classics. He has 2 in the race. McKenzie, I'm going with the older horse. in West Coast. Simply, we've gotten to a point with Bob Baffert where he can hand feed us. We believe what he tells us because it's true. He doesn't lie to you about how his horses are doing. You can read between the lines. He's not a difficult read. And when he keeps offering one supportive, he keeps telling you how good West Coast is doing. It was a quote, probably doing the best he has in his career. That was a quote from Bob Baffert on West Coast. I think you're making a little bit of a mistake if you read too much into Mike Smith opting for Mackenzie, being that West Coast is going to be retiring in 2019. Maybe you see him in the Pegasus. I don't know. I know that Mackenzie will be one of the most important older horses next year, staying in training, and Smith doesn't want to lose that mount. And from what I understand, is more of a coin flip than anything else. Certainly not an easy decision, Mike Smith going with Mackenzie, but I think that helps your price on West Coast. It's really hard to fault his 1.25 mile form at the grade 1 level. I mean, no shame in finishing behind Thunder Snow and the bias that was at Maidan that night in the World Cup, and running, third behind Gun Runner and Collected, who was a different horse at Del Mar last year in the Breeders' Cup Classic. West Coast feels like a man among boys to me, just physically seeing him out there. How confident Bob Baffert is, and the fact that he was supposed to be the best older horse going into 2018. I think he's in front late. I think he'd get desperate late, and I think Yoshida picks off West Coast in the shadow of the wire in what I think is going to be an explosive and wildly exciting, entertaining Breeders' Cup Classic.
Craig Walker?
So I agree with Laffit on West Coast. I mean, he's my top choice in this race. When these horses run these 125s, and the one at Dubai is the 134. I mean, that race always gets a big number because of the type of race it is. But he and Accelerate have run the top numbers. And so, Accelerate I'm going to put in. I just don't want him to beat me. So, he's run 125 his last 2 races. As good as he's ever done. Back here, he'd run a 126 back at Del Mar last July in 2017. So, I mean, he's the thing is, does he need to be on the West Coast? That's the thing. Can he run a big race outside of California? So that's the big question mark. The horse who, has been so intriguing watching all the morning activity is Thunder Snow. He's had these he's been here for quite a while. He's, had these like a mile workout and a 7 furlong workout. And then he had the blowout, I guess, was it yesterday? Yeah, and so that was kind of a crazy unexpected. So I mean, this horse is as fit as a horse could be, and then the other horses I like are just Mackenzie, and then I do think Yoshida has a shot, like what Laffit was saying. I like that he did run this 121 figure back at Ascot, so any improvement off that puts him right with these horses. So there isn't like a big improvement he has to run. I mean, there's some other horses who have looked great in the morning, but I just think they need to improve too much to get with these other horses. Steve?
Well, I had to turn my selections in for Express Bet last Wednesday, and it actually weaves through a lot of what you guys have laid out. I picked Mackenzie, and Mackenzie to me has that 3-year-old profile that has played so well historically in this race, and the performance at Philadelphia. And as it happens, I'm lucky to have seen Mackenzie a bunch of different times as a 2-year-old, and then in that San Felipe, and then at Parks for the Pennsylvania Derby. And that kind of a performance, anything close to that or any improvement from it, is absolutely going to make him competitive here. You, as Craig has done successfully all night, pointing out the kinds of figures that win these races. we've got 34 runnings of this race and many of these races, and there is a lot to be said about the speed figure pars that work. And so you really do have to focus in on the horses that are in that neighborhood. And you're much better off building your bets around those kinds of horses. And that's McKinsey and West Coast and Accelerate. So you pick and choose from that point on style and on the pace scenario. And as Laffit points out, closers here in this race have typically done even better than the Derby type horses. However, if you are within the lead, if you are one of the horses first through fourth at the eighth pole, 3 of those 4 horses are going to be in the superfecta when they hit the wire. And so some of the same general Derby handicapping principles are at work in here. That points to horses like Yoshida and like Mind Your Biscuit. And I picked Mind Your Biscuit second, Yoshida third. Axelrod or Pavel is the kind of horse that you want clunking up late for third or fourth. And I know there's people that are going to put saber bets on Pavel based on the Stephen Foster effort. So unlike so many venues in the Breeders' Cup travels, this is really the only place where you've got a template for 10 furlong races. There's no place else that we go. Even back when we ran at Belmont and all the Santa Anita Breeders' Cups and even the Gulfstream ones, there just is no template for a mile and a quarter like you have here. So we do get that benefit, and the Derby and the other 7 Breeders' Cup Classics here, they tell you where to look. And so I think you just, you pick and choose based on your pace scenario and on the closer you like. I think you want maybe one horse that's going to be on or near the lead, one horse that's going to stalk up close, one horse from mid-pack, and one horse from downtown. And you can feather them in as you wish. But use what is being given to you going in.
One thing, Steve, I can't remember of a Breeders' Cup Classic favorite where more people have been in a hurry to line up to play against than Accelerate. I don't know if it's the Sadler stats have to have a lot to do with it. The race in the Awesome Again. Maybe we were just expecting to see a repeat of the Pacific Classic, but I can't remember one. A Breeders' Cup Classic that seemingly, like, universally everyone can't wait to get in line to play against, and I'm really interested to see what the early wagering looks like to this race.
Well, there's a couple of points on the Sadler scenario. We may get to this race, and John Sadler might have 2 Breeders' Cup wins, Catalina Cruiser and Selcourt. Mm-hmm. You get a sense that, chances are the Catalina Cruiser, more likely than Selcourt probably, but either or could win. And I don't think that Accelerate, if you want to dismiss Accelerate, you can't do it on the basis of the fact that he's in the 14 hole and that it may prove that, right? That would be a huge mistake. All you got to do is think back to Joel Rosario on Practical Joke and the miraculous ride that he gave from was he in the
19,
18, 19,
20? 19, and he was 19 and he was on the fence at the first turn of the Derby.
Exactly. And Accelerate doesn't need the lead here, folks. I mean, for everybody that says, from the 14, you've got to be hard used. We're not at Gulfstream. You've got the entire stretch for Joel Rosario to find a place to drop in. And I guarantee you that he's in the 2 or 3 pack.
Yeah, he's going to be sitting. Trip and Post will not beat Accelerate.
And Laffit, you can attest to this. The people that are looking at that race from Santa Anita, this is literally for you. This is not your father's Santa Anita, because that suits you more than anybody.
That's good.
That's my best line ever.
That is great. You got it. Yeah, you got that. That's a classic. That is an instant classic. No, I mean, if it was Bob Baffert telling us what John Sadler is telling us, we wouldn't have the concerns. But Sadler has had the struggles in the Breeders' Cup. I think there's some from a from a storytelling standpoint, the idea that John Sadler, it's going to be 30 years since he made his Breeders' Cup debut as a trainer. The first time the Breeders' Cup was at Churchill Downs, it was 1988. He started a razor sharp, fast sprinter by the name of Olympic Prospect on that cold, wet day. And the reason so much is made of Sadler's record is because he is such a good trainer. If he wasn't, nobody would care. But it's hard to believe he's gone this long and started, as many horses as he has without a win. But it was Baffert telling us that Accelerate his training up to the Breeders' Cup Classic the way he was training up to the Pacific Classic. Well, that we would just take it hook, line, and sinker. But there's some hesitance, and I get it because the statistics do count, obviously. He seems very confident, and he has been training very well. The 14 is fine. I envision a picture-perfect trip sitting just off the speed, maybe a length or so back, out in the clear. Like I said, racing luck, trip post, it's a question of whether or not Accelerate is good enough. If you want to play against him because of Sadler's Breeders' Cup stats, if you want to play against him because of Sadler's shipping stats, that's fine. If you believe he is the best horse in the race and going to bring his Pacific Classic to the Classic, then all that means is you're going to be handsomely rewarded, because I think he's going to – I'm not even convinced he'll be favored at post time.
No, somebody said they think McKenzie might end up favored. I heard that from a couple of pretty savvy sources.
And if Catalina Cruiser manages to get beat, that, relatively speaking, Accelerate's price goes through the roof.
Well, and there's a few horses like that are outposted in particular that may end up providing value for that reason, where people start abandoning obvious horses, including Marley's Freedom. And I would say tomorrow, Anthony Van Dyke, 4-1 in the morning line, and people seem to think that Ryan Moore can't win from out there on Anthony Van Dyke. They're nuts. Van Dyke is right.
Go watch the 15 Juvenile Turf at Keeneland with Hit of the Bomb, breaking from the grandstand, and the ride Moore administered on that 2-year-old colt and working out the trip that he did. If you like Anthony Van Dyke, don't let the post throw you.
Yeah, because if he ends up paying $10.40, it's going to be one of the greatest overlays in Breeders' Cup history.
Mm-hmm. He's an A-teamer. Typically, O'Brien wins the Juvenile Turf with his B-teamers. How many of his Juvenile Turf winners have you never heard from again? Rote and George Vancouver didn't turn out to be very much. Mendelssohn being the exception. Hit of the Bomb wasn't much. Anthony Van Dyke he's A-team material, and as funny as it sounds, on paper, he has the profile of a horse that would typically be considered too good to run on the Juvenile Turf.
Well, any other questions out there on the applet? Everybody ready? We'll give a couple of final suggestions. One thing, I give a pep talk every year. I put it in my written analysis, and I do it on the radio show. I'll do it here. Don't get frustrated if you don't hit anything tomorrow. If you don't hit anything early on Saturday, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You got 14 cracks, and the undercard is terrific, by the way. You've got a lot of other good races that dot the undercard. Make sure you have your bankroll appropriately managed. Do not get late on Saturday and have one of your best opinions. Maybe you like the Wildcat, and she's going to be 7, 8, 9 to 1. Don't get to that part of the day and have blown your bankroll, so you don't have the kind of bet ready that you were counting on. Make sure you've done your homework, apportion your bankroll, keep the powder dry, as Johnny D said, and have fun. And just remember, you could get it all back. You could be leaking money for 2 days and get it all back in the Classic. And if you don't get it back in the Classic, you can get it back in the Chaluki after the Classic. Be patient. And this is one of the 2 best days of the year for us as horse players. Hope everybody stays safe and has a good trip and has a great time and gets lucky. It only takes one. It only takes one. Laffit, give him a pep talk.
The word is discipline. You're having too much fun at the track, you get too excited, and you go too deep too soon. You gotta have a plan. You absolutely have to have a plan, because you don't want that to happen where, whether it's in the middle of day 2, you've already spent a little bit too much and you have to change your strategy. You have your strategy going in, and it's about pacing yourself a little bit and understanding, like you said, it is a marathon, and taking advantage of the idea that these are the 2 best days of the year for handicappers, especially this year. It'll be interesting to see if there's any type of correction. I don't know who to blame from last year. Was it the best horses not running well, or just poor handicapping? I don't know. I just know 11 of 13 favorites were defeated, and many heavy favorites circling the drain and finishing off the board. Watch the undercard races, obviously, for the turf course. We believe the main track will be fast, but setting up such an exciting 2 days of racing. These are our championship events, and as excited as we get for the Triple Crown, these horses from all over the world getting together. The reason it's considered, you get the value when you have so many top class horses. Some are going to slip through the cracks, and horses that otherwise would be favored in similar situations, you get double digits on. It's great. It's always been it is one of my favorite events year round in thoroughbred racing. Can't wait for the show tomorrow. We get started on NBCSN with Future Stars Friday at 3 Eastern. And of course, the 9 Breeders' Cup races for older horses on Saturday. Really looking forward to it. Hoping the weather clears up, and it's going to be great.
Greg, final thoughts?
Yeah, just to reiterate everything you guys said. The other thing too is just not, you want to have your key bets, but still not everything's going to go exactly like you thought, and also, like Steve and I were talking about before Laffit showed up, you really got to pay attention to those turf races tomorrow, and then kind of maybe regroup and reconsider everything again for Saturday or for the later races on Friday on the turf.
And one other betting suggestion, that this, particularly knowing that the turf is going to be potentially a difficult element. Those of you that are pick 4 and pick 5 players, you may want to pare back and play some pick 3s. The pick 3s that have 2 dirt races and only 1 turf race. That would minimize your exposure. If you're a pick 3 player, play some doubles instead. That's an alternative. If you're somebody that struggles with turf generally and are even more intimidated by what we might encounter, well then, you know what? Abandon the multi-race wagers and add some deeper horses in triples and supers, so that you catch that 4-figure trifecta or that 5-figure super. Really think it through, plan a strategy. If you're not playing tomorrow particularly, make sure you read the charts, watch the replays, get a good feel for what Saturday's going to look like. Look at the races and plan your betting strategy. Be aware that you do have 3 2-day double wagers. You've got the juvenile to the Classic. You've got the juvenile fillies to the distaff. You got the juvenile boys turf to the turf. So 3 2-day doubles, and then there are the 7 head-to-head wagers that are a little wacky. If you know about them, then you know them. If you aren't aware of them, don't worry about them right now. wait. If you're a neophyte, it's a little tricky, but the head-to-head matchups include things like Naval versus the World, and the Euros versus American horses in the juvenile turf races, things like that. And it's a $10 minimum wager with a 10% takeout. It's an interesting proposition. The Breeders' Cup is trying to do some new things long term, and they're to be applauded for that. So I want to wish everybody the best of luck. Hopefully you'll be with us in December when we're looking forward to Los Al and the Futurity and to the Starlet. And I'll be with you tomorrow for weekend preview, the biggest weekend preview of the year on Sirius XM. Laffit will be on NBC. Laffit, lay out the coverage.
3 o'clock Eastern, NBCSN. All of tomorrow's racing is on NBCSN. We actually begin Saturday on .com and streaming and Facebook for the Turf Sprint and the Filly Mare Sprint. Reverse order, the Filly Mare Sprint's the first race, Breeders' Cup Saturday. Then we'll get started with our NBCSN coverage with the next 3 races. The NBC coverage will feature the Distaff, the Mile, the Turf, and of course the Breeders' Cup Classic, the Classic at 5:44 Eastern, I believe.
Well, if you need anything, the team at Stats Raceland's ready to help you. You can use the forum. Look for the little speaker box icon. Anything you need, stats feedback at Equibase.com. Follow stats_Raceland on Twitter. Follow Laffit Pincay TV and Craig Walker and Steve Byk and Uber Capper and everybody. And we'll see you in December. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a great Cup, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Great luck at the Breeders' Cup.
Thanks and good luck.